I first want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm really mostly excited to learn from all of you and humbled to share a little bit of what I've been doing. I want to say first that this work is informed by my own lived experience as a white, settler, straight, cisgender, able bodied university professor that is also situated at a private liberal arts undergraduate institution in the southern United States. And so there's all of these inherent blind spots and tensions infused throughout that work. I want to begin by situating the work and my background, say a little bit about the experiences and strategies that have led me to this approach, some barriers, and then talk about some case study work that I've been doing about how to reimagine what it means to participate in something like a pluriverse to try to hold space for that from within academic structures. What does that look like with the power and privileges that we bring to that work? So real quickly, I also wanted to say that this work is infused by my experience as a philosopher and a director of design thinking, as somebody who's still trying to figure out how I use the power and privileges I bring to these situations in relationship with diverse communities and how that can help to shift some of the unjust, exclusive systems, practices, and cultures that are present, especially within the academy and across those divides. I'm trying to stay aware as well of the hypocrisy of trying to do this work from within the system and as a part of that system. At times, I feel wary of seeing these same identities over occupying these spaces, and I'm disturbed that I contribute to that overrepresentation. And then troubled by the consistent inadequacies I bring to these tasks. So again, so eager to learn from all of you. And I'm going to situate some of the assessment and research I'm going to talk about within Law Palmerston's third university, thinking about how we can use some of the tools that are around us, some of those practices and processes, and reappropriate those to do different kinds of work. So with that in mind, a couple of very recent research and assessment metrics that have come out in 2019-20, evaluating changemaker education with Ashoka Yu and Bar Lika's assessing design thinking, looking at the kinds of practices that are happening across nonprofit, government, and business sectors and what kinds of outcomes they're perceiving. And Ashoka Yu is looking at what it means to assess for change making in a way that's hopefully more inclusive. So looking at those practices and then shifting to this new role that I have, the first thing that we did was create a coalition of individuals from across the university, but also who were in different kinds of positions. So administrators with faculty full and full-time and working, just teaching a class or two alongside community partners and members and students, trying to understand what's happening around change making across the campus and the local community. What can we learn from one another? How do we visualize what's happening here? And where are the opportunities to better support each other and change the work that we're doing? That kind of relationship building work where you bring people together across their silos led to two research studies that we have. One looking at the history of these practices across the past 3 to 4 years. What can we learn from that? So that's a longitudinal study that's also across stakeholders. So we're interviewing alumni, faculty, but also community partners. What do we have to learn about the stories, the mindsets, the challenges, the recommendations they would have about how to do change making work moving forward? The other study looks at what's happening across the university campus. We have 35 different programs that we're assessing, what kinds, again, building on that study, what kinds of practices are happening in this curriculum, what kinds of outcomes do faculty perceive that are of value or not, what kinds of challenges are they facing, and what's the relationship between these two. And that's going to allow us to make some potential comparisons to what we're doing, to what's happening in other sectors. And then again, maybe do some advocacy for changing what we're doing to enhance that. So this is just a visual of all the different programs we have involved in the study, graduate and undergraduate, liberal arts, sciences, and so on. The findings really show that, maybe unsurprisingly, at a liberal arts institution, we're very heavily using those first kind of practices of listening and talking, but we're not doing as much of the prototyping and iterating and testing and working with in relationship on real, tangible projects. We've also found that we have a number of programs doing deep dive work into this that want to be enhanced. And there's some interesting comparison findings to what we're finding in our own university and to what is happening out there in the business, nonprofit, and government sectors. So we've got these two studies looking at the historical setting of what's going on, as well as trying to map the systems. And I'm trying to also look across all different kinds of groups about what they're experiencing. All of that work is infused by my background as a feminist pragmatist philosopher, wanting to do work that is situated in our identities, that is place-based and relational, but also action-oriented, and connected to my work in Michigan with Grace Lee Boggs and the Boggs Center. That the idea that we really always need to situate our approach, that revolution is relational, it's two-sided, it's emergent and transformative. All of this also links me back to efforts on emergent strategy, that radical change is often more incremental than we would realize, that small actions move us forward, that change is constant, and that there's ways to kind of press for that change in the spaces we're in, and that it might be worthwhile to continue to enter spaces of difference. I also link this work to the work of Josina Bank, which is very recent as well, about how we make people aware of what is often invisible to them, their power and privileges, but the way structures and culture functions to press us to make certain actions instead of others. She talks about the role of aesthetic disruption and how design can really start to spark disruptions in how we think that can lead to macro level changes. And she's got some incredible examples of how this has happened in her own work. I also see this infused with participatory action research practices. I've got a few publications on that, looking at the value in those practices, but also the challenges. I love how they really force us, encourage us to invite others in and to get out, hold us accountable to everyone involved in these problems, and try to press the kind of research we're doing into action. But I've also found that there are a lot of risks and challenges to that work, and that kind of practice can be co-opted as a cover of legitimacy. This also links back to the wealth of barriers that we confront when we try to do this work from within the academy. So there's a lot of research showing how hard it is to do this kind of work. And I've also encountered a lot of risks and barriers, and that's despite the wealth of privilege that I bring to that work. So again, research on faculty experience confirms this over and over, a lot of publications on that. The epistemological, historical, structural, cultural barriers to moving education into being more embedded in its communities. A lot of blind spots here. Research on faculty also show that we're still often very committed to this idea that impact is the number of citations of our article and so on. Although it also shows that faculty entering the academy now really do want to approach research practices that are more embedded and relational and more activist oriented. So there's hope there. So some strategies that come out of all of this over the past decade, that there really is a need to sustain our engagement across borders and spaces of difference, that we need to find critical hope in the face of tragedy, that we need to seek out radical imaginaries, that sparking of difference, and that we need to move forward in relationship with others. For me now in this space, I have opportunities to create think tanks and to fund those, to co-design cross-institutional research that would be of value to everyone, to learn together about how to press for that change, and to do it over at least a 2 to 3 year period. So I'm interested in having conversations with others who might be interested in something like that, a think tank and a global research project. To critically study what's happening, but then to press for and again advocate for that change and to hold space for more creative approaches. I also want to say that as a part of that work, I had the opportunity to be a co-editor of a new book series with Peter Lang Publishers, and I really want this to legitimize the kind of critical and creative decolonial activist kind of research that's coming out now, and I would love to support any projects that might look like that, and I'd be really happy to talk with anyone on that as well. So again, I'm interested in what can we do to move forward, what might we do together. Really, I'm deeply interested to just learn with all of you, and I'm grateful to